And lastly, which connects straight from what I said just now, if it is R&D, wouldn't they be poking around looking for these breadcrumbs? Would they know they're there? Wouldn't we create noise for the user or the environment? You must consider the amount of noise and friction you're going to create for IT and the users. And that requires integration with the IT systems. That requires making sure you maintain your network hygiene as you go to this project, because that is a very critical sticky point when you want to go about this deployment plan for deception. Next slide, please. Now, the really important part is that attackers will come back, and they already would know deception is there. We need to update it. We need to revisit the deployment plan. We need to look at the use cases we chose, whether it's hunting, incident response, detection, and really consider what is our security strategy. Are we meeting those needs? We need to set the milestones that will make sure the deception is giving us that value, as opposed to we have deployed to this number of endpoints. You could, for example, say that catching the red team is something that's very important. You can test in the lab, you can catch real attackers. But even with testing the red team, you have to take into consideration, for example, how would the red team go about this? Can they fake or be in a zero-knowledge environment where they don't know the organization and wouldn't recognize what's real and what's not? Just some things to think about. And lastly, we need to make sure to map out what we need to integrate with, whether it's the SOC, whether it's the threat intel team, whatever it is, and make sure that we have the actual requirements for the passwords, the network allowances, whatever it is ahead of time, because that is one sticking point that constantly makes deployments difficult, also constantly can destroy our deployments. And then, of course, we want periodic reports on the deployment, the status, and all of the other things around that, going back to the value which we discussed. Next slide, please. I think I just moved one. No, I didn't. So can you go back one? Yeah, thank you. So the idea is really that we can use deception with nearly any pain point because it's built on stories. I don't think that since the 90s, when people used to go around and say, hey, yeah, what do you need to protect? The database, no problem. The firewall will do that for you. And the stories are kind of like that, whether it's about detection, investigation, automating the SOC like we discussed, whether it's about incident response, whether it's about hunting, responder past the hash, threat intelligence, which we'll discuss the last few in a second. There are a lot of different ideas and points where deception can really bring value across different teams. Next slide, please. And I think this is you, or it's me, actually, right? So next slide.
Yeah, no, it's all. I think our implementation challenges here, Gadi, they really just start to reiterate for those watching, for all of our attendees here, of what we're seeing and what's inside of it. So first and foremost, when you go through implementation, as Gadi just mentioned here, your environment is very, 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 very noisy. Don't deploy it as some sort of cyber deception program, and then you end up getting caught inside of your own noise. That's number one. Don't let your cyber deception rules and alerts get lost inside of all the other stuff going on in your environment. Number two, as Gadi mentioned just a moment ago, make sure, when you deploy your breadcrumbs, and if you want to think back to the story of Hansel and Gretel and whatnot, those were targeted breadcrumbs. Those were targeted things that were put in place. However, you want to make sure that your users don't fall for the same exact thing. So when we say noisy, consider, again, your ability to detect your alerts as well as your ability to get around your environment here. Some of the other things to be considerate of, again, make sure your IT and security separation is in place. Make sure that you have defined your collection requirements. Make sure that you have defined your deception and that everyone who needs to be aware of those things in place is aware of them. Second, I want you to make sure that you're proving that value internally in the absence of attackers. And this right here is one of the most important points, because I see a lot of people implement some sort of security program and then they don't get hacked. And they say, well, the security program was successful in us never getting hacked, and therefore it's worth this. Or someone does not implement a security program and they never get hacked, and they say, I didn't need a security program because I never got attacked. We don't want you to think in that state. We want you to think in the state of, again, compromise is imminent. It's going to happen at some point. So let's get that value proven. And Gadi already spoke earlier about getting that red team involved as well. A couple other implementations, and this really just speaks to the size of my networks and everything like that. A large network is going to be challenging just because of the sheer concept of it being a large network, especially if I've got remote users or cloud systems based in there. And then the other consideration when it comes to those large networks is to think about where can I automate things? Where can I plan around my crown jewels? And when we talk about planning about crown jewels, think about where those things may be located, where they backed up, where are they stored, how many countries are they in. And then the one thing we don't have mentioned in here as well, which obviously is on everyone's forefront right now, is regulatory requirements and what you can and cannot do with data as well. Gadi, I'm going to hand it back to you to walk us through the last two sections here, talking about post-op, which is, again, evaluating that value. And then we're going to wrap up with other deception services.
Sounds good. So evaluating the value. Next slide, please. The idea is we spoke a lot about the value. We spoke about pain points, but let's just go through it very quickly so you have it written down. First one is the pain points. Business risks. What do you get covered by a deception story, or you can call it the control if you like. The red team. You need to validate the control's effectiveness. You need to make sure it's not just about installing the control and making sure it's there, but rather does this thing actually provide the value that was the pain point and potential value. You want to counter lateral movement techniques, mimikatz, pass the hash. You want to prove that it actually does that. And of course, you want to catch attackers. Now, just waiting to catch attackers may never happen, or it might happen all the time. But if you want to, unfortunately, in the security industry, we deploy and not require for people to catch attackers. So what I would say is, when you work with your vendor, or when you look at open source systems, or whatever it is, and you decide to spend the time and effort on that, or whatever it is you choose to do, ask them to open up their case studies to you. Ask them to explain exactly how they caught the attackers, what IOCs, what group, how they did attribution. Go through that, and hopefully you might hopefully, first of all, you will never get attacked, but if you do, you will catch them very, very quickly. And lastly, the very basic. Are you actually getting the visibility into your network that this could provide? Next slide, please. Now, there are many other things you can do with deception. It doesn't have to be about the environment, the network, the endpoint. So we want to talk a little bit about those and finish with that. So Matt, next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, threat intelligence. There are a lot of different types of threat intelligence out there. Some of it is about taking OSINT and cutting it to size. Some of it very, very high value. Some of it is just somebody else's honeypot output. So I would ask, why not take your own honeypot output, provide your own IP space and monitor it with deception, because everything we discussed so far was for the internal network, not externally. But much the same, when I ask people what actual threat intelligence would be the most useful thing they can imagine, they say, who is targeting me right now? What are they interested in? What are they looking for? What are their tools? What are their IOCs? What are the TTPs? And that is something deception can do. Deception is not just for detection, it can also be used for intelligence gathering. So for example, you've been attacked with a spear phishing. Take that spear phishing and detonate it in an environment that looks like yours and get these details. You can extract the toolset, TTPs, IOCs, and so on. Please, next slide, Matt. And that is a great value from the threat intelligence side. And you might ask, what if I don't have the spear phishing or the malware that the attacker is using? I would say, lead the attackers to your deception environment. You can create fake personas, environments, organizations, business units. You can do all of that to make sure that when the attacker searches for you, they will find what you want them to find. And more importantly, you will be able to get, once again, to the detonation phase where you see what they do and incubate them. And you can do the same thing on the dark web. You can leave data for them to get to you. Might be dangerous. You might want to look first, is my data being shared regularly? I don't want to draw attention to myself. You might actually say, no, only when somebody is asking for information about me am I going to feed them data. So the idea of deception-powered threat intelligence is something that I really believe in and am pushing very hard in my own organization. Next, please. Another example is incident response. Incident response, and Matt understands this much more than I do, is very noisy. You come in, you start installing things on endpoint, watching the network. With deception, you can try to just kind of smoke them out, wake the dragon, create some assets, a VPN service, whatever it is, the attacker that's already well entrenched will go to without tipping your hand that you're actually there. And another example is at the end of the incident response process, once you're done with the remediation, you can deploy deception according to what you already discovered about the attacker and assure yourself to the level that's possible they're not doing lateral movement right now, they're not active right now. as we know, and this happened to us in one of the APT cases we've caught, I think 5 so far, where the attacker was hiding in a VLAN that wasn't covered by the SOC and the IT systems, and then they came back a month later, and we caught them on the rebound. So essentially, just by monitoring after the incident response process and assuring that there is nothing going on right now, we actually managed to catch them when they did come back. So there's a lot of extra values with deception that you might not consider when you deploy the normal deception system, whatever it is. The most important thing to look at, there are deception systems out there that are essentially honeypots. There are deception systems out there that give you the basics of, we want to create solid deception. There are deception systems that give you a lot of extra value around, as well as the ability to customize it in whatever way you like to orchestrate it and essentially do more advanced stuff. And I can't tell you what's a good fit. If you want to catch bots, you should go for regular honeypots. So that's a very critical aspect to think of when you consider what deception system would be right for you. Next slide, please. So before we finish, and I would like to turn it over to Matt, there is one more thing I would like to say. We really try to make this presentation about deception and about value and about, excuse me, an organization and how it would use cyber deception. But there is one thing I would like to say about Symmetria. Other than, of course, we would love to give you a demo or show you anything, and please come to us, www.symmetria.com and all that stuff. We actually provide our product for free. You can go and download our community edition, try this out for yourself. Some of the enterprise features are not there. Some of the Windows decoys are not there. You have Linux due to licensing issues, but the full system is available for download, and it's free. So that's number one. Go and check it out. Number two, there is a distribution by John Strand, the ADHD distribution, which holds in the live CD, all known or known to him deception open source tools that exist. Now, it's not a deception system, but if you want to play and try to get things done, you might want to take a look at that. As I said, we at Symmetria would be very happy to talk to you, and we thank you for being on this call. Matt.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Gadi, and thanks again, everyone, for joining. Carol, I'm going to hand it back to you for any questions. I think we might have a minute left, a minute or two left to cover a question or two.
All right, we'll start with this one. How would you go about deploying deception in the cloud?
Gadi, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I guess that one is for me. Deception isn't really that different in a way. You can deploy decoys in the cloud. You can use IAM or EC2 breadcrumbs. You can do all of these different things exactly the same as you would on-premise. But for example, if you try to do the responder detection, it wouldn't work. We don't really have a lot of time to get into it, but it's really interesting to see in action.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to Gadi's answer there is just think about how the cloud features into your prem operations. I've actually worked with some organizations who I say, if you had to bring that thing in the cloud back on-prem, or if you had to bring it to on-prem for the very first time, where would it fit in the information flow? And just because it reaches out to an external instead of an internal IP does not change that flow. So I would consider that one as you know, think about where it flows, and then think about the other implementation steps we talked about as well.
Yeah. Do we have time for another question, or are we done for now?
Well, there's one more. To deploy deception as a control, don't you need to have mature detection controls first?
That's a very, very good question. Matt, would you like to take that one?
Actually, Gadi, I was going to see if you wanted to cover it first, and then only because you got a chance to walk through the different maturity phases. I think you might have the better experience of this, but go for it.
Okay, so first of all, I can tell you again, it's new for me being a vendor. It's 4 years now, but I've been on the other side. And you know what, I'll put it this way. Deception might not be right for you. My product might not be right for you. Checking the fit is the most important thing. And definitely, if you're a mature organization, if you already have a SOC, or a hunting team, or a threat intelligence team, or incident response team, you'll get a lot of value out of deception. But the most important part is that if you have absolutely nothing, deception would be a control I'll definitely check out, because it can give you the visibility that you don't have. I would say not even better visibility you might not have at a very low cost, at a very low implementation cost, at a very low personnel cost, and you'll be able to get it very quickly. So it might not be right for you, but I would say especially if you're not a mature organization, if you don't have other detection in place, I would check it out, especially, again, because most of your current detection, if you already have it, is on the edge, or on the endpoint, and we already know that attackers are where they already succeed to get in. And I'm not saying you don't need these other controls, but deploying them takes a lot of time, and you might want to take care of lateral movement first if you have absolutely nothing else, because they will get in. But again, it might not be right for you. I'm a big believer in the basics, even though I believe they've changed.
All right, well, that's all the
Couldn't agree
time we
more.
have.
Carol, with that, back
Oh,
to
go
you.
ahead, Matt. All right, thanks.
I was just saying I
thank
couldn't
you so
agree
much.
more, but passing it back to you now.
All right, well, thank you so much, Gadi and Matt, for your great presentation, and to Symmetria for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again from the next SANS webcast.